The more secular society is, the less the society mind corruption of its own self. Seems like if you're adult and if you do harm to yourself, it's alright since you don't do harm to other people. But if you think carefully about it, if I hurt myself with corruption, with certain things, then it's the first step to hurting other people. Because if you hurt yourself, it means you corrupt yourself with some desires, thoughts, even actions that are unacceptable in some sense. That's why they call corruption. And what next step usually is hurt to other people. Because if you don't have respect for your own body, then how you can respect for individuality of other people? How you can respect for the life of others if you have no respect for your own life? That's what I have a problem with the secular society. Because it's always about harming yourself. Seems like you can wrestle with moral ideas on your own by extending them the way you want. And if you can hide your own corruption from the outside world, you kind of can get away with that. Since the soul itself in a secular society doesn't exist. And if the soul doesn't exist, then nothing can hurt you, and death is just cessation of your complete self. And I was always thinking about the self, what I am. I exist. I see the world. And I'm the one who created the world, who shaped the world with my own ability to understand the world through understanding of myself. The world itself exists in other people's minds as well, in other people's ideas, in other people's notions. The same as mine. What unites us is the common moral frame, because moral frame helps us to understand and accept each other, to tolerate each other's weaknesses. But somehow we start celebrating each other's sins. We start being prideful about each other's foolish notions, where we worship our physical appearance. And seems like we only have our bodies that we have to satisfy constantly. And we only have our feelings, and we have to put our feelings before everything else, before even common sense. And that's scary because society cannot sustain itself if we constantly mind our own feelings. And I think it came from worshipping our bodies. Because if I'm worshipping my body constantly, I feel depressed, I feel miserable, and therefore I have misery. I have these miserable feelings that I force others to respect. And those miserable feelings came from worshipping my own body, for treating my body like a fairground and not like a temple that you have to respect. Because that's what self-respect comes from. You cannot respect others if you do not have respect for yourself. The entire idea of respect is the respect to yourself, not obsession with yourself, but respect of the self, where you know who you are and you try to develop yourself, because life, in a way, constant work on yourself, constant recognition of your own mistakes that you have to correct constantly. Otherwise, you drown slowly in corruption of your mind and your body. And a thought is dangerous if this thought directed on corruption of your own body. There's no... A thought is a thought, and what it does to us, it corrupts us slowly if we don't have opposition to this thought, if we don't struggle to overcome this thought. Because I have a light in my hand, and I direct this light on other people while I stay in the darkness. And I don't see myself this way. I don't examine myself this way. I just take myself for granted, and then I believe that all my foolish notions and idiotic ideas is a norm that other people must to agree with. And if they don't agree with those ideas and foolish notions, it means something wrong with them and not with me. And that's the problem with the secular society, where people demand loudly to accept their degeneracy, to accept and to respect and to celebrate their sexual preference, their celebration of their bodies. The whole idea of real freedom is in restraint. You have understanding of yourself through this freedom, and you know what must be restrained and what must be developed. Because the only one thing must be celebrated about human being is their intelligence, also their soul. Because there's nothing, intelligence without soul, without faith, is a Luciferian way of seeing the world. Because you can easily become obsessed with your own intelligence and start justifying everything by this intellect. It's intellect obsessed with itself. There's nothing worse, because you can just keep justifying every miserable or degenerate move you make. And you need soul, you need morals to help you to restrain this intellect, to be able to control yourself, because the life is in control of your own vices. And that's the problem with the secular society. They gave you free range to explore those vices. But why do we need to explore those vices? What's the point of exploration of those vices? Because it makes us miserable. It makes us depressed for a reason. Because you cannot stop exploring them, since they turn into addiction that actually subjugate you to their service. And then you enslaved by those addictions. And it's really hard to stop this enslavement, to fight back, to emancipate yourself, because it's almost impossible. And the only way to know yourself, and the only way to have faith in God. And somehow we believe that faith in God is something that must be embarrassed of. It's something that if you're not intelligent enough, only then you can propagate this idea of God. And it's not true, because if you look back at Christianity, people struggled with the idea of God, and they struggled to understand the biblical corpus itself. And there's so much wisdom in this biblical corpus. There's so much wisdom to understand it, because you need wisdom. And you need strength to be able to act upon this wisdom. I always know what I need and how I need to act, but I didn't have enough strength. And I'm learning myself through discipline to make the right decisions. Because it's like I know what is right, but to act upon what is right is incredibly, incredibly complicated. To understand what is right doesn't take much, but to stand for what is right while everybody else don't, that's the hardest thing to do, because we want to be part of the tribe. We don't want to be outsiders, and this fear of being outsider sometimes makes us silent. And in this silence we live depressed, because if you cannot defend what is right, it's eating you from the inside. And I don't know how you can achieve proper success in life if you don't fight for what is right. Because we live only once, and I always try to listen to myself, because I want to know what exactly I'm looking for, what exactly I'm pursuing, and what exactly the idea of success for me, the idea of successful life. Because the idea of successful life for me was different on every stages of my life. And the more I live, the more I understand that real success is to live with harmony with yourself. Because it doesn't matter, you can live in a tiny little house, having very, very small income, and be much happier if you were a rich, incredibly famous man, but has this disharmony with yourself by sacrificing wrong thing, by making improper sacrificing, by betraying yourself constantly, because there's no way to stop once you begin betraying yourself, because betrayal happens one step at a time, and when you realize that you betray yourself for so many times, it's really hard to turn back and to become and to correct yourself, because it's like a spiral that drags you down. But you betray yourself when you're afraid to say the truth to yourself first, and then to other people. Because other people, in some sense, don't matter if you cannot tell the truth to yourself. If you tell the truth to other people, it becomes generic because you don't stand behind the truth. And the feeling, I'm really concerned with this obsession of feelings. Because feelings, they do matter, but they matter not for other people, but for me. When I have these feelings, I try to understand them, I try to process them, I try to make some sense out of them, because they help me to color my thoughts, to make my thoughts more live. They help me to stand behind my thoughts, those feelings, because they help me to feel the thoughts. But if I use feelings to override my thoughts, to override my reasoning, then my feelings works against me, and after I demand other people to accept my feelings as the reasoning, but they're not. First, you have a thought, and then you reason with this thought. And when you're sure that this thought is correct, you have this feeling that you need to protect those thoughts from other people, again, through reasoning, not through your feelings. Your feelings, in some sense, gives you energy to stand behind those thoughts. And that's, I think, the main idea. Because reasoning is a very important thing to have. You have to reason constantly with your thoughts. You're wrestling with your thoughts like you wrestle with God. You wrestle with the faith in God. The same, you wrestle with your thoughts. If you have some corrupt thoughts in your head, you try to wrestle with those thoughts. You try to understand, why do I have those thoughts? Because it's not, suppression of those thoughts is not going to work. It's only make you much more coward. At the same, you should act upon those thoughts as well. But once you start wrestling with those thoughts, spar with those thoughts, you become more proficient in intellectual way, because you start understanding yourself and where those thoughts comes from. And that's the idea. It's like when you wrestle with God, and when you wrestle with your thought, you wrestle with your faith in God. And you wrestle with your thoughts, where they come from. You constantly keep yourself on alert from learning something new every day about yourself, because that's how you reflect the world. You reflect the world through yourself. Otherwise, the world doesn't exist if you have no reflection of this world within you, because you have to process. Otherwise, you try to reflect the world of other people. And it's usually wrong, because you become a part of the mob. But if you reflect your authentic self, and through this authentic self you reflect the world, it's much more richer, much more brighter, and much more interesting. Because if you reflect the world of other people, like if you go on X, for example, or on other social media like TikTok, you start reflecting the world of other people that reflect the world of other people. And you playing the broken phone, because once you receive the message, it was digested by thousands upon thousands of people, and most of those digestion was incorrect, and you receive just a vomit. But if you want a real world without being processed by stupid minds, you have to take responsibility and face the world by yourself and through yourself.